Easter, everyone. 75 years ago, April 12th was not a day of celebration, but it was a day of shock and fear because the 32nd President of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt, suddenly and unexpectedly died at his second home in Warm Springs, Georgia. He was 63 years old. It's hard to appreciate today, but FDR's sudden death on April 12, 1945, was to the World War II generation what JFK's assassination was to the baby boom generation. It was not only a moment of kind of collective sadness, of national mourning, but one of intense anxiety. Franklin Roosevelt was the only president a lot of young people in their teens and 20s could even remember. He was the only president they knew, and he had been the man at the helm for 12 years, guiding the nation through depression and war. And there were still two wars to be won. The war in Europe was winding down, but the war in the Pacific was bigger than ever, and nobody could see when that was going to end. One of those young people who was filled with some anxiety was a young man, a 22-year-old in the Coast Guard in the Pacific, George Herwig. George has come to many of our Veterans Breakfast Club events and talked about his 3 years at sea in the Atlantic on a Murmansk run and also in the Pacific. He had seen a lot of action, kamikazes, he had seen a lot of death. But he said it to our group at the Veterans Breakfast Club that the only time he could remember breaking down in tears was the day he heard that Franklin Roosevelt had died.
And we were at the tail end of a convoy out in the Pacific somewhere, I don't remember where it was. And I had been learning signaling, and I was learning the light system with dots and dashes on the lights, and I was getting a message from a ship in front of us. President Roosevelt had died, and I had this BT this guy, I don't know how many times, and I guess he was getting pretty well fed up with me, and so I got a hold of our signalman and I said, "You have to take this message, I can't take it." He said, "What is it?" I said, "Take the message." And he said, "President Roosevelt died." I said, "I got the message right, but I didn't really want to hear that." And it was just like our father had died. That's sort of the way we felt about President Roosevelt, and that was a very, very sad time in our life also.
The day Franklin Roosevelt died on April 12, 1945, he was probably not only the most powerful man in the world, he was probably the most powerful man in the history of the world. And his death really should not have been unexpected. In fact, those close to him, his doctors, knew that something was wrong. A physician had examined him in July 1944 during his campaign for his fourth term as president, and the physician recommended that he shouldn't run because he wouldn't survive a fourth term. He had hypertension that was off the charts. He had hardening of the arteries. He had very advanced heart disease, and yet he ran anyhow. Anybody with a critical eye could have seen from the early 1945 on that there was something wrong with the president. Look at him in those pictures at Yalta. He looks gaunt. He looks glassy-eyed. He's 30 pounds underweight. He's the shadow of the robust president that most Americans knew. My dear Polish mother always blamed the president's poor health for why he gave away Poland to Stalin at Yalta. And I would say, "Mom, you can't give away what you don't have." But she has a point. He was not a well man. About 10 years ago, a physician and a journalist put out a book called FDR's Deadly Secret that argued that FDR's health problems actually stemmed from advanced melanoma that had become metastatic and that was afflicting his abdomen and his brain. You notice in early pictures of FDR that he has a lesion over his left eye, over his left eyebrow, and that lesion seems to grow over the years and then disappear suddenly in the late 1930s, early 1940s. He probably had it removed. It was probably melanoma. And that would explain also the problems that he seemed to have reading his scripts for the fireside chats. His fireside chats, radio addresses during the 1930s and 40s were just expertly crafted, informal conversations, one-sided conversations with the American people. He kind of bonded him with the American people through the 30s and 40s. He was somebody who, as they would say in Hollywood, never missed his mark. He always hit his mark. He always knew his script. But suddenly, in early 1945, he began skipping words in some of these fireside chats and some of his speeches. And the authors of FDR's Deadly Secret did notice that the words he missed, when you look at the typescript of the speeches, were words on the left-hand side of the page, as if he was having a vision problem on his left eye. They speculate that he did, in fact, have blurry vision, and it was because of a brain tumor that was afflicting him. That would also explain the serious weight loss that he suffered in 1944 and 1945. He probably shouldn't have run for that fourth term, and he should have given more thought to who his vice president was going to be. He put Harry S. Truman on the ticket almost as an afterthought. Truman was untested. Not many people who thought much of him. In fact, on April 12, 1945, Truman was having his afternoon bourbon with Speaker of the House Sam Rayburn when he found out that FDR had died. He rushed to the White House, Truman did. He met Eleanor Roosevelt, and he said to Mrs. Roosevelt, "I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do?" And she looked back at him and said, "Harry, you're president now. You're the one who needs help." And I think we are just fortunate that Harry Truman turned out to be as tough as he was, and as smart as he was, and as fast a learner as he was, because President Roosevelt had not briefed Truman on virtually anything that had been going on in the war or in the world. And so Truman really had to learn on his feet, and things turned out okay because of his leadership. And I think it just goes to show that presidential leadership in times of crisis is important, and also often in a crisis, leaders turn up from unexpected places. Thank you very much for listening, and if you want to hear more history and veteran stories, please do like and follow and subscribe to the Veterans Breakfast Club on your favorite social media platforms, and visit vbcpgh.org to hear more stories. I'll see you again soon, and happy Easter.